It seems like everywhere you turn these days, there's data, from tracking your steps to like what shows up on your news feed. But what about data's impact on like law enforcement?
Yeah, that's what we're diving into today, right?
Yeah.
How is big data changing the game for police, for better or for worse?
Exactly. And to help us dig into all of this, we've got some really thought-provoking excerpts from an academic article all about the history and the future of data use in policing.
It's a history that's actually surprisingly short.
Oh, really?
Yeah, think about this for a second. Imagine a world without organized police forces.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's...
It wasn't until 1829 that London established its Metropolitan Police.
Right, the famous Bobbies or the Peelers.
Exactly.
Named after Sir Robert Peel, who really, spearheaded that whole idea of professional policing.
As we know it today.
Yeah.
And think about it. I mean, that shift, to uniform officers that were focused on both preventing and fighting crime, that was a radical change.
Totally.
Before that, it was mostly informal watchmen or militias. Yeah, it makes you realize that, order as we understand it now is a pretty recent development.
It really is.
Yeah.
So the U.S. wasn't too far behind, I think, adopting that London model in cities like New York by 1844. But it's fascinating to see how even back then, people were already envisioning technology playing a role in law enforcement.
Oh, absolutely. During the 1960s, amidst the civil rights movement and calls for, reforming the police, President Johnson's Commission on Criminal Justice actually predicted that technology would revolutionize policing.
That's incredible foresight, especially considering, they're saying this before personal computers were even common.
Yeah.
Wow.
They saw the potential early on. One early example is actually the St. Louis Police Department's Lemeris system in the 1970s, which used algorithms, basically sets of rules, to decide where to deploy patrol officers based on crime data.
So even back then, they were using data to try and be more efficient and effective at fighting crime.
Exactly. And as computing power just exploded,
Right.
so did the possibility. By the 80s and 90s, police departments were mapping crime hotspots, leading to focused patrols in high crime areas.
Which brings us up to the era of big data and what has become known as predictive policing.
Yeah.
It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's very real.
Right.
These algorithms analyze massive data sets looking for patterns to predict where and when crimes might occur.
Wow.
Take the ETS model used by the LAPD, which was actually more accurate than human analysts at predicting crime locations.
That raises some pretty big questions, though. Like, if you can predict where crime might happen, does that create a responsibility to act? And what are the ethical considerations of something like that?
Absolutely. And the data itself has evolved, too.
How so?
We've gone from basic crime counts to detailed files with video text locations. It's an overwhelming amount of information.
It really is. The Bogota police, for example, use GPS trackers to monitor their officers' movements every 6 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah.
It revealed that their resources weren't being used as effectively as they thought.
Interesting.
Sometimes even simple data, when looked at on a large scale, can reveal a lot.
It shows how powerful big data can be, but also how much it can potentially reveal about individuals.
Right.
And that leads to a whole other conversation about how much transparency is good, especially when it comes to police actions.
Right. We have more data now on police use of force. Traffic stops everything.
Wow.
This can help identify officers who might be outliers in their actions.
So is this level of scrutiny a good thing for the public?
It's a complicated question.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it can highlight potential problems within departments.
Sure.
But it also brings up concerns about surveillance and potential bias.
Which leads to the worry that all of this data could actually worsen racial profiling rather than help address it. More information doesn't always lead to better outcomes, right?
That's the crux of it. Some argue that this transparency can actually help monitor and mitigate bias, but there's a valid fear of a police state, especially with examples like the NYPD collecting data on everyone they stopped, even those who were innocent.
It's a tough line to walk. We want safety and security, but not at the cost of our privacy.
And even with all this data, there's a gap between having it and knowing what to do with it.
Right.
A prediction of a crime hotspot is one thing, but how should police actually respond?
It's like having all the ingredients for a cake, but no recipe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about moving beyond traditional methods and thinking proactively about prevention, which brings us to a rather sobering point.
You mean the fact that despite all of this data, has it actually made us safer?
Yeah, the crime clearance rate in the U.S., the percentage of crimes solved, has basically stayed the same since the 1960s, hovering around 45%.
So all the tech advancements, the DNA evidence, the algorithms, they haven't had the dramatic impact many expected. Like the revolution in crime solving is still waiting to happen.
It's a puzzle, for sure.
Yeah. Why hasn't big data had a bigger impact? Is there something we're missing?
Lots to unpack there.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part, from the surprisingly recent birth of modern policing to the rise of predictive algorithms and the thorny ethical dilemmas they bring up. But this is just the beginning.
Yeah. In part 2, we'll delve into the challenges of turning data into action and look at some of the most cutting-edge technologies being used in law enforcement today. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into big data policing. We've been exploring its evolution, but it's clear this is a field that's constantly changing.
Yeah, and it's moving beyond simply reacting to crime.
Oh, okay.
Police are increasingly using data to try and prevent it from happening in the first place.
That's a huge shift in mindset.
Right.
It's like going from playing defense to offense.
Exactly. One approach that's gaining traction is called risk terrain modeling.
Okay.
Think of it like predictive policing, but instead of just focusing on where crimes happen,
Right.
it looks at environmental factors that might contribute.
So things like abandoned buildings, poor lighting, even the location of certain businesses.
Right. By mapping these factors, you can identify areas that are more vulnerable to crime and then work to change those conditions.
Interesting.
It could be as simple as adding more streetlights or as complex as collaborating with community groups to address social issues.
So it's a much more holistic view of crime prevention.
Right.
But I imagine there are concerns about how this kind of analysis could be misapplied, especially given historical biases in policing.
Absolutely. One of the biggest worries is that these models could perpetuate existing biases, leading to the over-policing of certain communities, particularly communities of color.
That's a crucial point. It highlights the need for careful consideration and oversight as these technologies develop.
Transparency is vital. And speaking of transparency, another big development in policing has been body cameras.
Right.
They generate a massive amount of data, initially seen primarily as a tool for accountability.
Right, holding officers responsible for their actions.
But it seems like there's a growing interest in using that data for other purposes too, like training and even prevention. All that footage could be analyzed to identify patterns in police-citizen interactions, leading to better training and de-escalation techniques.
It's amazing to think about. Some researchers are even using AI to analyze the audio from body cameras to detect signs of aggression or distress.
Wow.
Which could help officers respond more effectively in tense situations.
It's cutting-edge stuff, but of course, we can't ignore the privacy concerns.
Of course.
I mean, we're talking about recording people's lives, often in very vulnerable moments.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
How do we weigh the potential benefits of this technology against the need to protect individual privacy?
It's a question that requires ongoing dialogue and clear guidelines.
Right.
Controlling access to this data, ensuring it's used only for specific justifiable purposes, and being transparent with the public about how it's being utilized, those are all key.
Absolutely. And, of course, we can't talk about big data and law enforcement without mentioning social media.
Right.
Police departments are increasingly using it for everything from gathering intelligence to identifying potential threats.
Yeah, it's another example of how the lines between our online and offline lives are blurring.
Right.
And it raises some big legal and ethical questions about surveillance and free speech.
For example, can police use social media posts as evidence in a case?
Right. Can they monitor activity to predict protests or crimes?
Yeah.
These are complex issues that the courts are still grappling with.
Wow.
What's clear is that social media's role in policing is only going to grow, and we need to be prepared for the challenges it brings.
It's a whole new frontier with a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to remember the lessons of history. Technology can be used for good or for bad, and it's up to us to shape how it's used.
Right. Do we use big data to create a more just and equitable criminal justice system, or do we allow it to reinforce existing inequalities?
That's the fundamental question. The power of big data is undeniable, but so are the risks.
We've covered a lot of ground in this part, from the potential of risk terrain modeling to the complexities of body cameras and the expanding role of social media. But the future of big data in policing is still being written.
In Part 3, we'll take a closer look at what that future might hold, exploring the emerging technologies poised to revolutionize law enforcement. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring the world of big data, policing its evolution and its impact on law enforcement today. But now it's time to look ahead to the future of this rapidly changing field.
Yeah, it's a future that feels increasingly like science fiction becoming reality. You know, some of the technologies being developed have the potential to completely transform how we think about policing.
Totally. Like, remember those sci-fi movies where the cops can track down criminals in seconds?
Right.
We might be closer to that than we think.
One technology that's already being used in some cities is facial recognition.
Oh, wow.
Imagine cameras that can instantly identify wanted criminals in a crowd or track the movements of suspicious individuals.
Wow.
Yeah, the potential applications in law enforcement are vast.
It sounds incredibly powerful, but also a bit unnerving. What about accuracy? What if innocent people are mistakenly identified as criminals?
Right, that's a critical concern. Facial recognition algorithms can be biased, especially against people of color.
Right.
And that could lead to increased racial profiling and wrongful arrests.
It's a reminder that technology is only as good as the people who create it. We need to make sure these systems are designed with fairness and accuracy in mind, and that there are strong safeguards to prevent abuse.
Absolutely, and it goes beyond just facial recognition. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is poised to change policing in countless ways, from analyzing crime patterns to predicting criminal behavior to even automating some police tasks.
So robot cops patrolling the streets, is that where we're headed?
Maybe not robot cops just yet, but AI-powered systems could certainly help police departments work more efficiently and effectively.
Okay.
Imagine a system that can sift through mountains of data to identify potential leads in a case or predict which individuals are most likely to commit a crime.
It raises some really profound ethical questions, though. Are we comfortable with machines making decisions that could have a major impact on people's lives?
That's a debate we need to have as a society. The point is, these aren't just hypothetical scenarios anymore. We need to start thinking about these issues now, before these technologies are so deeply embedded in our lives that it's too late to course correct.
Right, and we need to have these conversations as a society, not just among technologists and policymakers.
Well, absolutely.
The future of policing affects all of us.
Absolutely. As we look ahead, it's crucial to remember that technology is just a tool. It can be used for good or for ill, depending on the choices we make.
So we can choose to use big data to create a more just and equitable criminal justice system, or we can allow it to be used to reinforce existing biases and erode our civil liberties.
The choice is ours, and it's a choice we need to make carefully with a clear understanding of the potential benefits and risks.
Well said. That wraps up our deep dive into big data policing. We've covered a lot of ground, from its historical roots to the cutting-edge technologies that are shaping its future. It's a complex and evolving landscape with no easy answers. But hopefully this deep dive has given you a new perspective on this important topic and maybe even sparked some questions of your own. Thanks for joining us.